Hey guys, and welcome back to Mike and his whiteboard. My name is Mike, and this is my whiteboard. Yesterday we talked about intrinsic value and how that relates to options, how you can calculate it, etc. So if you'd like to review that, definitely check out the show archives page and go to Mike and his whiteboard. You can see it there. Today what we're going to talk about is extrinsic value. So just reviewing from yesterday, if we flip to the next slide here, we've got premium and how that's made up of intrinsic and extrinsic value as you see here. So, quick review, intrinsic value can always be calculated. It's the real value of the option at expiration. So if an option is 10 points in the money and the stock price is trading 10 points higher, then at expiration that option will have 10 points of intrinsic value. So extrinsic value is what we're going to talk about today. And one point I want to make clear is that extrinsic value differs from intrinsic value in the sense that it's not so black and white. So with intrinsic value, you can always calculate what that is exactly. Extrinsic value, you can find out what that number is, but in terms of what it's made of, it's a little more gray. So we're going to talk a little bit about today time and volatility value. So time value first is basically the time that you're paying for the option. So if we are buying an option and we've got 50 days till expiration, we're going to pay a certain amount for that option. Just like any other contract that you sign, the longer that contract is worth, the more value it's going to have. So if I pay $2 for a 50 days till expiration option, if that option has the same volatility and I'm looking at a different contract that's 90 days into the future, it's going to be well over $2 because for those extra 40 days, I'm going to be paying a premium to hold that option. So for an example, I'm going to have that option to buy those 100 shares for 40 days longer than the first example of 50 days. So just like any other contract, again, it's going to have more value, so we're going to be paying more. With implied volatility, it's basically putting into context the range that a stock or option might go in a certain period of time. So next week actually was going to be implied volatility week for me. We're going to deep dive into implied volatility, but for simplicity's sake, extrinsic value is made up of time and implied volatility. So what we're going to do today is graph this out for you and show you a few different things that I think some people won't really understand until we show them here. So flipping to the next slide, we've got this graph, and along the y-axis, you can see that we have total value. Now, I left that blank because I want you to focus on the actual premium and not just the dollar values. We can go back and give examples once it's all completed, but for now, I've left that value blank there. I just want you to focus on the total value here. Along the x-axis, we've got days till expiration, or DTE as you might see it in many of the platforms. So we'll start with 50 and we'll trickle down to 0, and you'll see that time will decrease and the premium with those options will decrease as well. So looking at the first graph here, we've got a certain value and we've got 45 days left until expiration, and the volatility percentage is 20%. So we can see here that with this underlying, we'll assume that the volatility percentage is not playing as much of an effect as the time is in the premium. Again, it's very hard to calculate that because the Black-Scholes model is very, very complex, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just take a look at this here. So we've got a certain value, 45 days left until expiration, and 20% implied volatility. Now, let's see what happens when we reduce the time. So if we're looking at the same implied volatility level and we reduce the days until expiration, you'll see that this option premium will decay. So another word for time decay is theta decay. But in this sense, you can clearly see that from 45 days down to 35 days, if all else is equal, that option is going to be worth less because we have 10 less days to hold that option. So there's going to be less value with that. Now, this is the next very important thing. When we throw up the next bar here, we're going to reduce the days to a lower value, but we're going to increase volatility percentage. So when we do this, when I've got 25 days until expiration, if volatility increases, our value here can creep up and be the exact same value as the first bar. So this is kind of a complex concept that I had a hard time understanding when I was beginning off with option trading. But once I got this, everything started to click. So another big takeaway here is that if days until expiration is reduced, but implied volatility increases, when you're looking at the first graph where we have 45 days, comparing it to the third graph where we have 25 days, theoretically in your brain you might think, well, there's less time, so the value has to be less. That's not the case with extrinsic value. If implied volatility increases, you can increase from the bar graph before, or you can get to the original bar graph we're looking at, or it can be even higher. There's really no level to where volatility can go in terms of extrinsic value. So generally speaking, when time decays, you should see a decay in the option premium if all else is held equal. But if implied volatility increases, you're going to see an increase in the option price, or you're going to see no fluctuation in the option price at all. So going to the next bar graph here, we're going to reduce the days even further, but now we're going to bring back implied volatility to our normal level of 20% for this underlying. So you can see clearly that implied volatility has dropped off, days until expiration has dropped off as well, so the total value is going to be less. So this is something that we might see for an earnings announcement per se. Let's pretend that we've got the earnings announcement here, and the next day earnings were out. There's no more speculation on what's going to happen because that has already happened. And now implied volatility has dropped. You can see that there's a drastic difference between the total value here and the total value here. Moving the bar even further, we're going to reduce the implied volatility, and we're also going to reduce the time. So now we can see that volatility has more of an effect than time, because with only 5 days left until expiration, it's only a week to hold it. So really the value that you're paying for or receiving if you're selling the option is basically based on implied volatility. Now again, it's hard to calculate. So when we were talking about intrinsic value yesterday, we can easily see that premium equals intrinsic plus extrinsic value. But when you're looking at extrinsic value, it's really hard to say time plus extrinsic value. Time plus volatility value equals extrinsic value. It's hard to calculate because those two go hand in hand. So let's just give some examples, some values here. So let's say we've got a premium of $5 on the very first graph. So we sold the option for $5 and 10 days go by. Now it's worth $4. If I wanted to close that position, I originally sold it for $5. I could buy it back for $4 and that would net me a $1 profit. That would be great, but let's say that I decide to hold the position for whatever reason. I want to capture more profit. That's totally fine. So we're going back to the third bar here. So now we've got the same value again as the original sell price. So originally sold it for 5, went down to 4. Now it's back up to 5, even though 20 days have passed, but implied volatility has increased. So implied volatility has a higher impact than you might expect with the extrinsic value. So again, we went through the earnings announcement, still holding the position. Now our premium has dropped even further. So let's say this is worth $2.50 now. So I think that nothing's going to change. I just want to hold this until expiration. So we get to the final value, and let's say it's worth $1. I might be able to close that if I want, so I would capture that net profit of $4, or I might decide to hold it till expiration, whichever I would prefer. But again, this is a visual explanation of extrinsic value and how it affects option premium, where I don't think a lot of people really understand, and we actually get a lot of support calls in terms of I've been holding this position, but nothing's happening. The option time is decaying, but the premium value is not decaying. And more often than not, I'll look at the implied volatility graph, and I'll see that the implied volatility graph is slowly increasing, which is going to basically hold that option premium there, and it's going to negate any theta decay that they would expect to experience. So some takeaways if we go to the next slide. Our very first takeaway is extrinsic value is time and volatility value. Again, I didn't write time plus volatility value because we can't really calculate exactly what that is. They go hand in hand, just like any contract with a lot of different variables. It's the same thing with extrinsic value. The second one, just because time passes does not mean extrinsic value will decrease. This is a huge brain buster for me that I basically went away with, but when you're looking at extrinsic value, just because time passes doesn't mean the option premium is going to decrease. So again, if time is passing, which you would think would decay the option premium, but implied volatility is increasing at the same rate, your option premium theoretically should remain the same. And last but not least, volatility has a much larger effect than in extrinsic value than you might think. So this is especially relevant with earnings announcements. So we all know that earnings announcements spike implied volatility. So when you're looking at implied volatility earnings announcement, if you're looking one day before the announcement and then one day after, generally you're going to see a pretty big volatility crush, which is going to reduce the premium in the option prices. So what we like to do is sell that premium when it's high and then close a position out or buy it back when it's lower. And if everything works out correctly, we would receive that net profit. So this has been extrinsic value. Again, next week is going to be implied volatility week. We're going to break down implied volatility. We're going to look at volatility skew, historical versus implied volatility. It's going to be a great week. So if you've got any questions or any cloudy points on implied volatility, definitely check it out. But until Tuesday, I am Mike, and this has been Mike and his whiteboard. Thanks. Have a good night.
Hi everybody! I hope you liked this video.
Click below to watch more videos, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to watch us live at tastytrade.com.